indicate that we are a, whoops, sorry. I'm trying to move the screen out of my way. Hold on. We're a federal grant and we're funded by the Federal Office of Special Education Programs to provide technical assistance for students who are deafblind. And I wanted to talk about the population first to just clarify, because I find that we often spend more time explaining what deafblindness is and is not. So people still, when we use the term deafblindness, conjure up the notion of Helen Keller and assume that the student doesn't have any residual vision or hearing, when in fact that actually is not the case in terms of the vast majority of students that we work with. So we typically use the term dual sensory loss, especially when we're working with families of young children and we're sorting out diagnostic information. But you'll also hear the term co-occurring sensory loss, multiple disabilities. You may hear MDVI, multiple disabilities with visual impairment, combined vision and hearing loss, again, being probably the most frequent that we use. I've also heard quite frequently deaf plus. So just to give you an example of all that terminology, I wanted to kind of underscore the population and the various ranges that occur. So it's important to note that the population of children who are deafblind represent an extremely, extremely diverse population. And 90% of these children have at least one or more additional disabilities or health issues. And 75% have 2 or more, 50% have 3 or more. So you can see that, again, in terms of deafblindness, it's not just vision and hearing, it's also additional concomitant disabilities that occur with this population. And this particular slide gives you an idea of, trying to make sure everybody is in the room, but it gives you an idea for degree of vision loss at the top and degree of hearing loss to the left. You can see in these shaded areas, the yellow boxes, the boxes, purple boxes to the right, and the boxes at the bottom, those particular categories all represent children, their sensory abilities and needs that are eligible for services at the federal level. Hold on, let's see. And I wanted to just give you a little bit of a flavor of the students in New Hampshire. And I really want to underscore that it is rare that we see children with significant sensory loss. It usually is in the milder categories. So this is more low vision, legal blindness. And similarly, when we look at students who are who have hearing, or who are deaf or hard of hearing, again, the milder categories prevail. It's rare that we get children that have no vision or no residual hearing. Related to the impact of deafblindness, I think it's really important to touch on this when we're speaking about the whole topic of assistive technology for this population, because deafblindness, it's really often described as a disability of access, and you'll hear that a lot. So it's critical that the team think about how assistive technology can promote access in those key areas of communication, mobility, exploration, participation in the environment, building relationships, social interaction, certainly concept development, building independence, and helping to support incidental learning that happens throughout the day. These are some other categories to consider. Certainly the age of onset and the age the child was first exposed to assistive technology, the degree of vision and hearing loss, whether there's the prevalence of additional disabilities, fatigue, and age of identification. So this is just a cautionary note. I find this a lot when I meet with various teams of various agencies and we talk about deafblindness. The communication needs or communication supports are often a common thread when we talk about children and adults. But when it comes to assistive technology, the learning needs of children who are deafblind are not necessarily the same as the needs of adults who are deafblind. So for example, the term deafblindness often applies to adults who have Usher syndrome, when in fact children who have deafblindness, again, getting back to that notion of additional disabilities, it really represents a very different population, but with similar needs related to communication. And I know I may be preaching to the choir for some of you on here today, but I thought it was really important to go back and review that whole definition of assistive technology to really underscore how broad it is. And assistive technology is any item, piece of equipment, or product system, whether acquired commercially off the shelf, modified, or customized, that is used to increase, maintain, or improve functional capabilities of a child with a disability. So again, it's extremely broad, and it could be something as large or significant as an automated van lift for a wheelchair, or something as small as a grip on a pencil or Velcro on a fork. I'm just going to see if I move this up here, if this helps folks. Again, assistive technology.
Hey, Corby, before her Zoom, can you help Sarah with her protractor thing again? She's got a couple more to do.
Okay, if you could make sure that you're muted, that would be really helpful. I'm going to mute all. Okay. And as I mentioned, it could be an augmentative communication system that provides vocal output for a student who cannot communicate with her own voice. Having a hard time with these slides, I apologize. So as it relates to the population of students who are deafblind, it's such a huge array in terms of low tech versus high tech. And assistive technology, again, is any kind of technology that enhances the functional independence of a person with a disability. So you have some pictures here that you can see. Project CORE, which is a whole approach to using tactile symbols, universal, tangible symbols, typically representing verbs. The middle picture is an example of a communication calendar system where the different objects represent the activities of the day. And similarly, down at the bottom, that's a daily schedule, but all of those items that are indicated and sort of go in correspondence represent a specific activity for the student. So again, the devices could be something like a magnifying glass, an object in a calendar system, or a marker, as well as high-tech, more computerized communication types of supports. It's really important when we talk about assistive technology for students who are deafblind is that we really look at what is the strongest access mode. And with that, both formal and informal assessment, it's important to look at the areas of vision, hearing, as well as tactile, motor, and vibration. So we're always gathering information around ophthalmology reports. Hopefully a learning media assessment is conducted by a teacher of the visually impaired. If not, it should be. And then there's also numerous functional vision assessments out there, which will help the team decide, again, what the strongest access mode is for the child as they're deciding what device or what supports are most appropriate. And always looking for audiological evaluation and information regarding functional hearing assessment. Now, these are sort of your, I would say, your best friends on the team when it comes to determining access modes and the decision-making process. Your TVI should be an integral part of the decision-making process, everything from positioning materials to the size of materials to the presentation in terms of complexity, lighting needs. Obviously, your teacher of the deaf would provide information on, say, speech-generated devices, strategies such as acoustic highlighting or listening skills as it relates to any speech-generated devices. Certainly your OTs and your PTs as far as where you can position the device so the student has best access and it minimizes the motor demands in terms of the actual use. And the speech language folks are really critical in terms of helping decide what are the most appropriate symbols And then the others that I mentioned are really helpful in terms of how can you modify those symbols and certainly make sure you have appropriate positioning. Once all that's made and you decide on the access modes, then you've got to really work on the motor pattern that needs to be taught, whether it's pointing or reaching or activating a switch. All of those different access modes frequently need to be taught with the students I'm speaking about. So this is a student who you can see her access mode. She's got a really strong access mode related to vision. She's able to look at the screen, and she's able to, in terms of her motor skills, to point and select what she wants. So again, if you looked at her access modes, I would say it's visual and motor at this point. In this student, again, very, very different. So for her, vision is not a primary access mode for her. She has cortical visual impairment. A strong access mode for her is auditory. So she can listen to music, and then what she does is she vocalizes when she wants the song to be changed. So her access mode is certainly her hearing, auditory access. And this student, you can see that he's accessing and using the technology here, both in terms of his vision and his hearing. But what's really supported his engagement here are the enlarged items so that he can access the information visually. And then he's also listening to the different sounds that are coming out in terms of this particular game and activities playing. So the important piece to note here is just, again, on the access mode is the physical load, the fatigue level. How can we present things easier so that the student can respond to the best of their ability and as accurately and efficiently as possible? So I always try and emphasize too, we have to look at the number of learning opportunities. So if you have a particular device, say it's a CCTV, or it's a very high-tech device, but it's only available to the student once or twice a week, that often is not a good choice long-term, because it's going to take that student much longer to learn how to use it independently. These are just examples of some what we call no low-tech devices. It could be a simple card on a lanyard to help the child communicate. It could be a visual scanning board. So the individual looks to the left or to the right to indicate yes or no. And it could also be raised lines on paper, so it gives tactile feedback to the student as they're writing. Again, some other low-tech devices here. This is a rocker plate switch on the left. But if we think about some of our students, if I had a student who had minimal vision, I may use a texture on one of these sides on this rocker plate switch to give them the ability to discriminate either pressing the right or the left side. And you could do the same thing with the switch on the right. This student is able to obviously hear, it's a voice output system, but if they needed additional support, you might use a tactile representation or a texture there to help them discriminate. These are more, I would call, mid-tech devices. Some of these have speech outputs. So this is a take and talk enabling device. A lot of these are commercially made. The individual on the right, this is a tactile symbol communicator, and it has a variety of different tactile symbols that he uses to indicate what he wants through direct selection, reaching for the item and pointing to it. Now, I want to underscore, related to high-tech devices, based on the time that we have here today, high-tech devices are exploding. As I think many of you know, the possibilities are endless, and you can certainly learn a lot about them today, and I guarantee you in a week or two, your knowledge will be obsolete, because again, the options are changing so much based on innovation. But certainly we look at things like a laptop or braillers that have various options, all of the apps that are out there, devices like ProLoquota Go. You can see that it's just a huge array, and I've indicated a link in the resource section of this presentation that has a whole list of high-tech devices as it relates to this population and those with sensory issues. I just want to mention here, a lot of folks use PECS symbols, which is great, but I often see PECS symbols that aren't visually accessible for students. And you can also see in this particular example, there's significant glare from these materials, which is can certainly be a problem for children that have cortical visual impairment. So it's just important to consider the picture size, the contrast, and the presentation of those pictures. I like to use this example of communication boards for one major reason. A lot of our kids have more elaborate systems, but communication boards are great to have as a backup when those devices break down or there's an issue. And it's also, from conceptual standpoint, it's really a great way of kind of assessing if the student understands that whole process that they're trying to communicate. So even though a student may be at a higher level with a higher tech device, I would say don't throw away that whole strategy that communication boards provide. Now, slant boards, many children with visual impairments use slant boards. It really helps in terms of the angle and the presentation of materials. The struggle often is the child's size and where they are in terms of presentation of materials. Again, reading materials, this is a way to mark where the reading materials are. There's a variety of handheld magnifiers, video magnifiers, screen magnifiers, and I'll just show you through here. This is an example of a child accessing print using a handheld magnifier. This is an example of a child using a video magnifier where they're actually accessing it from the video materials and able to take their place. But the teacher has to be very savvy in terms of knowing where the child is in the process and stopping her instruction, again, to make sure that all of her students are engaged and have equal access. Here's an example of a screen magnifier. So this youngster, Ethan, has the materials underneath the device and it's depicted up in enlarged print. But as you can see, you enlarge the print, but now you're going to increase the visual demand for that student to scan that entire screen, and it takes longer and it can be more fatiguing. So there's a lot of options that have to be looked at and a lot of considerations that have to be put into play when you're deciding which kind of device and which kinds of supports to put in place. This is an example of a student using a telescope, and the telescope is used primarily to access distance. It's great in instances where a student may be in an auditorium or there's large group instruction. And we also know that computer software and hardware is exploding. There's so many options. It has been. It's wonderful, and our field has certainly benefited as well as students, but there are so many options out there. I find that my IT folks and my assistive technology consultants are really helpful at looking at what are the various products that are out there and various companies that really put out, more products that might be applicable to this population. So these are all examples of adaptive keyboards to help support vision and also tactile representation. Tablets, certainly, iPads, this is an example of a refreshable Braille display that the student is using, and it allows for built-in Zoom and speech features as well. And I find it's really remarkable how these students, when they're exposed to the technology early, they learn it very, very quickly, certainly as they're motivated to communicate and engage with their world. These are just some examples of Braille devices and note takers. There's several products out there, but you can see from the old-fashioned Perkins Braillers, still a lot of people out there using that, electronic note takers. Again, on this particular item, this is a photo that shows two people communicating and using a screen Braille, refreshable Braille device. And alerting devices. I just wanted to mention that with alerting devices, a lot of our students have limited living options, residential options, if they're not able to exit a particular home or living situation. So there are a lot of alerting devices out there that can really help support students' independence as they're maturing. Certainly, I think it's important for all high schoolers to have this within their IEP. So here's a huge list of the high-tech products. Again, there's not enough time to go through all of these today. They're really extremely vast, everything from mobile apps to Braille to educational technology, note takers and such. So I really encourage you, if you have questions, to take a look at these lists. They're all indicated in the product section here. And whoops, sorry. I just wanted to, let's see if I can go up here. On my final thoughts, I just really want to underscore that for this population, for children who are deafblind, it really is about access, because assistive technology is really going to be what makes it or breaks it for many of these students. And our pal, Mr. Rogers, I think, says it best when he talks about all of us at some time or other need help. And whether we're giving or receiving help, each one of us has something valuable to bring to this world. And that's one of the things that connects us as neighbors in our own way, each one of us as a giver and a receiver. And when I think about assistive technology, that's really about what it's about. It's the giver and the receiver, and how can we facilitate that as really individualized as possible, so the student is really fully engaged. So with that, I just want to show you some resources that are available. I really urge you to check these out. And the AFB resource, Perkins Learning, the National Deafblind Center, the Center on Deafblindness, and then there's an article here. So wanted to try and just give you that general overview. And I believe there's a chat here, and I'm trying to get into it, but I can't. So Cheryl, if you're able to access anything that might be in the chat, and let me know so I can answer any questions that might be out there.
Sure. This is Cheryl. The first one is from Allison, wondering about how you will be sharing the PowerPoint.
I believe the PowerPoint will be put into a PDF, and you'll be able to access it that way. I'm not really sure how you were setting that up on the site, Cheryl. I know that Karen had mentioned it will be available.
Yeah, I think you can upload them to the site, but it's also going to be in the recording.
Okay, are there any other questions? Any other questions in terms of the students that you're working with, or anything in terms of the high-tech, low-tech perspective? Like I mentioned, Cheryl, if there's anything out there, I can't see the chat room.
Yeah, no questions coming in.
Okay.
So, but we want to thank you so much for this information and participating today. It's just nice to see, one, the array of tools and technology that's available, but also to recognize how complex it is and how we need specialists like yourself to help us really support our deafblind students.
Well, thank you. It really is complex. It's a very unique and complex population, but my contact information is here in the PowerPoint. So if you have any questions, you'd like to follow up with any of the students that you're working with, or you're in that decision-making process, please feel free to contact me. I'd be happy to connect.
All right. Thank you
so
much.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good day. Thank you.